Sometimes the ones every child trusts are the ones the world fears the most. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in courage and destiny, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love finds the broken. Now, back to Emily Carter. A terrified wolf pup burst through the towering pines, its tiny paws slipping across rain-soaked leaves as frantic cries echoed behind it. Hunters shouted somewhere in the darkness, their torches scattering golden light between ancient trees, but the little creature ignored every familiar scent. It raced past its own pack, past the warriors sworn to protect it, driven by an instinct it could neither understand nor resist. Then it saw her. A young woman knelt beside a quiet stream, sleeves rolled above pale wrists, washing berries gathered for supper. Her faded gray dress was patched more times than anyone could count, and the worn cabin behind her leaned slightly beneath the weight of countless winters. She looked nothing like a queen, nothing like a healer, certainly nothing like the terrifying creature the packs had whispered about for months. Yet the frightened pup let out a tiny cry and threw itself into her arms without hesitation. Emily Carter barely had time to look up before the trembling body collided with her chest. "Easy," she whispered, wrapping both arms around the tiny wolf. "You're safe now." The pup's frantic heartbeat slowed almost immediately beneath her gentle touch. Its desperate whimpers softened into quiet breaths until, within seconds, it had fallen asleep against her shoulder as though it had finally reached home. Emily smiled sadly. "Another one," she murmured. It had happened so often that she had stopped asking why. Somewhere beyond the trees, angry voices grew louder. She carefully carried the sleeping pup inside her tiny cabin, laying it upon a blanket near the fireplace before adding another piece of wood to the fading flames. The warm scent of herbs drifted through the room, mixing with fresh bread cooling on a rough wooden table. Everything she owned could fit inside this single room, yet somehow it always felt large. Enough for one more frightened little guest. She had never planned this life. 6 months earlier, Emily had belonged to Ashridge Pack, though saying she belonged anywhere had always felt like a cruel joke. Born an Omega whose wolf never awakened, she had spent her childhood carrying water, cleaning kitchens, and lowering her eyes whenever stronger wolves walked by. The elders called her defective. Young alphas laughed that even the moon goddess must have forgotten her name. Mothers quietly pulled their children away whenever Emily passed, as though misfortune itself followed in her footsteps. Then came the terrible accusation. 3 wolf pups wandered beyond the southern border during a harvest celebration. Before they returned safely the next morning, terrified but unharmed, someone decided the easiest person to blame was the rejected Omega, who had no family left to defend her. No evidence was ever needed. It never had been. They called her cursed, dangerous, unnatural. By sunset, she had been ordered to leave Ashridge forever with nothing except a small sack of clothes and the weathered cabin abandoned deep within the forest. Emily never argued. She simply nodded, thanked the elder who handed her the old cabin key, and walked away while laughter followed behind her. She believed exile would finally give everyone peace. Instead, something impossible began happening. On her very first night alone, 3 lost wolf pups appeared outside her door. The next week, there were 5, then 8. Some arrived hungry. Others were injured. A few simply curled up on her porch without making a sound, as though they had traveled for miles searching for something only they could sense. Emily always fed them, soothed them, bandaged tiny wounds, and carried each one back toward the edge of its own territory the following morning. She never kept them. She never questioned them. She only wondered why every frightened child seemed to know exactly where to find her. Outside, another faint howl drifted through the evening air. Emily slowly lifted her head toward the darkening forest. Her expression changed. It wasn't fear. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. "You're not alone," she whispered toward the trees before anyone appeared. Moments later, 2 more tiny figures stumbled out of the shadows, running straight toward the woman every lost pup somehow already trusted. The next morning, the little cabin no longer felt empty. 3 wolf pups chased each other around the fireplace, while the 2 newcomers from the previous night slept peacefully beneath a wool blanket Emily had stitched herself years ago. Their tiny tails thumped softly against the wooden floor whenever they dreamed, filling the quiet room with a warmth she had almost forgotten existed. Emily smiled as she poured fresh goat's milk into shallow bowls. "Breakfast first," she whispered. 5 tiny noses lifted at once. 5 eager pairs of bright eyes looked only at her. None of them growled. None fought over the food. They waited until she gently nodded before moving forward together. It was another strange thing she had learned not to question. Wolf pups who belonged to different packs normally carried the instincts of their bloodlines. Even as children, they distrusted strangers and competed with unfamiliar wolves. Yet whenever they reached her cabin, all that fear simply disappeared. They ate side by side as though they had always been family. Emily watched them quietly, unable to explain the peaceful ache growing inside her chest. She had never been blessed with children of her own. In truth, most wolves believed no alpha would ever choose a rejected omega whose wolf had never awakened. Perhaps that was why every time these tiny creatures curled against her, something deep inside her heart whispered that this was exactly where she was meant to be. After breakfast, she carefully checked each pup for injuries. One tiny female still limped slightly from a thorn lodged between her paw pads. Emily removed it with gentle fingers before wrapping the paw with clean linen. Another pup carried fresh claw marks across his shoulder, as though something much larger had chased him through the forest. Emily mixed crushed moon leaf with lavender oil, spreading the cool herbs across the wound. The frightened little wolf whimpered only once before resting his head against her knee. "You're very brave," she murmured. "Someone must be looking for you." As if answering her words, distant howls echoed through the mountains. The pups froze. Tiny ears stood upright. Emily expected them to panic and run toward the familiar voices. Instead, every single one instinctively pressed closer to her. Her smile slowly faded. "Go home," she whispered softly. "Your families miss you." One by one, she led them toward the edge of the forest where the sense of neighboring packs grew stronger. Usually the pups hesitated before leaving her side. Today was no different. The smallest gray pup looked back 3 separate times before disappearing into the trees. Emily stood watching until the last little tail vanished beyond the ferns. Only then did she turn toward home. She never noticed the fresh footprints hidden beneath the morning mist. Heavy boots, large enough to belong to a full-grown alpha. High above the valley, riders wearing black cloaks moved silently through the forest. Their horses breathed clouds into the cold air, while experienced trackers examined every broken branch and muddy footprint. At their center rode a man whose presence silenced even the wind itself. Rowan Blackwood, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, studied another set of tiny paw prints crossing the trail. His silver eyes narrowed. Again, one of his captains muttered. Another trail leading toward the western forest. Rowan dismounted without a word. Kneeling beside the tracks, he brushed gloved fingers across the damp earth. For pups, no signs of struggle, no scent of blood. They had not been stolen. They had walked willingly. That made even less sense. For nearly 3 months, reports had poured into the royal capital. Lost wolf pups from different territories vanished overnight, only to return healthy within a day or two. No ransom, no injuries, no memory of where they had been. Parents called it a blessing. Elders called it impossible. The royal council called it a threat. "Somebody is hiding something," Lord Victor Ashcroft said coldly as he approached the king. "No ordinary omega could attract children from every pack. Either she is using forbidden magic, or someone is using her." Rowan remained silent, his eyes fixed on the trail ahead. Magic left traces. Blood rituals left scents. Fear left broken branches and desperate claw marks. But these tracks carried none of those things. Only tiny paws walking calmly toward the deepest part of the forest, as though following the safest path they had ever known. Rowan slowly rose. "We're not hunting a kidnapper anymore," he said quietly. "We're following the children." None of the soldiers understood what he meant, but every one of them obeyed. Deep inside the forest, unaware that the most powerful alpha in the kingdom had begun following the same tiny footprints, Emily Carter placed fresh bread into her oven. At that exact moment, another lonely wolf pup emerged from the trees, looked directly toward the smoke rising from her chimney, and began running home. By sunset, the forest had fallen strangely quiet, as though every living creature sensed that something extraordinary was about to happen. Emily Carter stood outside her cabin, hanging freshly washed blankets beneath the towering pines when a familiar rustle drifted through the undergrowth. She smiled before she even turned around. "You're early today," she said softly. A tiny black wolf pup burst from the bushes and sprinted straight toward her. Seconds later came another, then another. Within moments, more than a dozen little wolves emerged from every direction, weaving between tree trunks, scrambling over moss-covered rocks, tumbling through ferns with joyful cries until they reached her. Some leaped into her arms. Others circled happily around her boots. The smallest climbed clumsily onto the wooden porch before rolling onto its back, demanding the belly rub it somehow knew she would give. Emily laughed, a sound the lonely cabin had not heard in years. One at a time, she whispered as tiny tails wagged furiously around her. "You'll knock each other over." She never noticed that this was no ordinary gathering. The pups came from different bloodlines, different territories. Some carried silver markings of the northern packs. Others bore darker coats common to the western mountains. Two wore the pale white fur seen only among wolves, living beyond the frozen cliffs. None should have recognized one another. Yet every one of them acted like siblings reunited after a long journey. Hidden nearly 100 yards away, Rowan Blackwood watched everything without making a sound. He stood motionless beside an ancient cedar while 4 royal trackers crouched nearby, their expressions shifting from suspicion to complete disbelief. "That's impossible," Captain Elias whispered. "Those pups belong to at least 6 different packs." Rowan said nothing. His silver eyes remained fixed on the young Omega standing barefoot among the children of wolves who should never have crossed paths. He had expected hidden cages, dark rituals, perhaps smugglers stealing valuable bloodlines. Instead, he found a lonely woman sharing warm bread with laughing pups who followed her every movement as naturally as flowers followed sunlight. "Search the area," Lord Victor Ashcroft murmured behind him. "There must be someone else here." Rowan slowly shook his head. "No." His answer came so quietly that only the nearest soldiers heard it. "Look at them." They did. Not one pup glanced nervously toward the forest. Not one searched for escape. They played. They rested. They slept against Emily's legs without fear. No alpha command existed powerful enough to create that kind of trust. Then something unexpected happened. A sharp cry echoed from deeper within the woods. Every playful movement stopped instantly. Tiny ears lifted together. Emily's smile disappeared. "Someone's hurt," she whispered before breaking into a run. Without hesitation, every wolf pup followed her. Rowan reacted instinctively. "Move." The royal trackers rushed silently through the trees after the strange procession. They found Emily kneeling beside a fallen oak where an unusually small silver pup lay trapped beneath a heavy branch. Fresh blood stained its pale fur. The frightened little wolf struggled weakly, unable even to whimper. Emily dropped beside it without thinking. "Easy," she breathed, brushing trembling fingers across its head. "I've got you." She pushed against the fallen branch. It barely moved. The wood was far too heavy for someone of her size. Before Rowan could step forward to help, every other wolf pup crowded around the trapped child. They didn't panic. They didn't scatter. They simply pressed close to Emily, tiny bodies surrounding her in complete silence. Then the impossible unfolded. The injured pup's frantic breathing gradually slowed beneath Emily's gentle hand. The terror faded from its bright little eyes. Even the birds overhead stopped singing. The entire forest seemed to hold its breath. Rowan felt something he had not experienced since inheriting the throne 15 years earlier. His instincts, those of the strongest alpha alive, did not warn him of danger. They whispered something entirely different. "Protect her." The command rose from somewhere deeper than thought itself. It startled him enough that he unconsciously stepped out from behind the trees. A twig snapped beneath his boot. Emily lifted her head instantly. Their eyes met across the clearing for the very first time. She saw only a tall stranger dressed in dark traveling clothes. He saw a rejected Omega kneeling among 15 wolf pups who had all chosen to stand between her and every other soul in the forest. Neither spoke. Yet somehow, in that single silent heartbeat, Rowan understood one undeniable truth. The children had never been taken. They had been coming home. Iron-gray eyes met gentle blue ones across the silent clearing, and for several heartbeats neither of them moved. Emily instinctively kept one hand resting on the injured silver pup while the others gathered closer around her legs. They were not growling at the stranger, yet every tiny body had positioned itself between him and the young Omega, as though following an ancient instinct older than language itself. Rowan Blackwood slowly lowered both hands to show he carried no weapon. "I'm not here to hurt them," he said, his voice calm and steady. Emily studied the tall traveler before her. His dark cloak hid the quality of the clothes beneath, and the leather gloves covering his hands concealed the calluses of a warrior. There was something strangely commanding about the man, yet his expression carried no cruelty. "They're frightened," Emily answered softly. "Please don't come any closer." Rowan stopped exactly where he stood. It had been years since anyone had given him an order instead of asking permission, yet he obeyed without hesitation. Behind him, Captain Elias and Lord Victor remained hidden among the trees, watching in stunned silence. "Why isn't His Majesty revealing himself?" Elias whispered. Victor's jaw tightened. "Because he wants answers." Rowan never took his eyes off Emily. "Those pups," he said quietly. "Do they belong to you?" Emily blinked in confusion before shaking her head. "No." "Did you call them here?" "No." "Then why do they keep coming?" She looked down at the tiny wolves surrounding her feet. One sleepy pup leaned against her ankle, while another rested its head across her boot, as though the conversation held no danger at all. Emily sighed gently. "I wish I knew." Rowan frowned. There was no deception in her scent, no flicker of fear hidden behind practiced lies. She sounded genuinely puzzled by the same mystery he had spent months trying to solve. "Every few days," she continued, "another one appears outside my cabin. Sometimes they're hungry. Sometimes they're hurt. Sometimes they're simply lonely." She smiled sadly. "I feed them. I make sure they're safe. Then I take them back toward their territories." Rowan glanced at the injured silver pup. "And this one?" Emily carefully brushed dirt away from the tiny wound near its shoulder. "He'll be all right." She dipped a clean cloth into a small leather pouch filled with cool spring water and gently washed away the blood. The little wolf whimpered only once before relaxing completely beneath her touch. Rowan watched every movement with careful attention. She used no chants, no glowing runes, no forbidden symbols, only patience, clean bandages, and remarkable tenderness. Yet the result was undeniable. Even badly frightened pups calmed the moment she touched them. Then something happened that made Rowan forget to breathe. The silver pup's shallow breathing became slow and steady. The trembling in its tiny legs stopped. Its ears relaxed. A faint silvery shimmer, so delicate it could almost be mistaken for reflected sunlight, briefly danced across its pale fur before disappearing into the evening air. Emily seemed not to notice. Rowan did. His instincts stirred uneasily, not because the shimmer frightened him, but because it felt familiar, like moonlight reflected across a peaceful lake, like a forgotten memory buried somewhere within his bloodline. Emily carefully lifted the little wolf into her arms. "There," she whispered. "You'll be running again tomorrow." The pup opened its eyes and immediately licked her hand before curling comfortably against her chest. Rowan had seen royal healers spend hours saving injured wolves with powerful gifts blessed by the moon goddess herself. None had ever inspired this kind of effortless trust. "Who taught you?" he asked quietly. Emily looked genuinely surprised. "Taught me what?" "How to calm them." She laughed softly, almost embarrassed. "No one." Her fingers gently scratched behind the silver pup's ears. "I just listen." Rowan tilted his head. "Listen. They don't always need someone stronger." Her gaze drifted across the gathered pups. "Sometimes they just need someone who doesn't expect anything from them." Those simple words settled heavily inside Rowan's heart. For years he had ruled through strength, responsibility, and impossible decisions. He knew how to command warriors and negotiate with rival alphas. Yet standing before this lonely Omega, he suddenly realized there was another kind of leadership he had never understood, the kind that could never be demanded, only freely given. Before he could speak again, another distant howl echoed through the forest. Every wolf pup lifted its head at once, but instead of running toward the sound, they all instinctively pressed even closer against Emily. Rowan slowly turned toward the dark trees. Whoever had made that howl was no frightened parent searching for a missing child. It carried authority. It carried anger. And somewhere beyond the shadows, someone else had finally discovered exactly where every lost pup had been going. The growl rolled through the forest like distant thunder, deep enough to send birds bursting from the branches above. Every wolf pup around Emily instinctively pressed closer, forming a trembling circle at her feet. Rowan's expression hardened instantly. That howl did not belong to a worried parent. It belonged to an alpha issuing a command. Branches snapped in the darkness. Moments later, nearly 20 armed wolves emerged from the trees wearing the crimson crest of the Eastern Council. At their front strode a broad-shouldered alpha with silver streaks in his beard and fury burning in his eyes. Elder Garrick's gaze landed on Emily, and his face twisted with disgust. "There she is," he snarled. "The cursed Omega." Emily's shoulders stiffened. She recognized him immediately. He had been one of the elders who voted to banish her from Ashridge without allowing her to defend herself. "I haven't crossed into your territory," she said quietly. "I'm not causing trouble." "Trouble?" Garrick laughed coldly. "Children have disappeared across half the northern territories, and every trail leads back to you." Several warriors stepped forward with iron restraints in their hands. The wolf pups whimpered together. "You're mistaken," Emily replied. "I never took anyone." "Enough lies." Garrick pointed directly at the frightened pups hiding behind her. "Look around you. How many packs do those children belong to? Explain that." Emily lowered her eyes. She had asked herself the same question every night for months, but no answer had ever come. "I don't know." Garrick smiled triumphantly. "Exactly." Hidden beneath his travel cloak, Rowan watched the exchange in silence. Every instinct urged him to intervene, but he forced himself to wait. He needed to understand who truly threatened these children. Lord Victor leaned close enough to whisper, "Now do you see? The council already believes she's guilty." Rowan's jaw tightened. Belief isn't proof. Proof rarely matters once fear spreads. Before another word could be spoken, one frightened pup suddenly darted from behind Emily and stood directly in front of her. Tiny legs trembled violently, yet the little wolf bared its miniature teeth toward the approaching warriors. Another pup joined it, then another. Within seconds, every single child had formed an unsteady line between Emily and the armed alphas. The sight silenced. The clearing. Garrick frowned. "Move them." None of the warriors did. They hesitated. No one wanted to frighten wolf pups. "I gave you an order." Garrick barked. One young warrior reluctantly stepped forward. Before he could touch the nearest pup, a deafening snarl erupted from the tiny silver wolf Emily had rescued earlier. Though barely larger than a house cat, it threw itself fearlessly in front of her feet. Emily immediately knelt, placing one gentle hand on its back. "No," she whispered. "You don't have to fight." Almost instantly, the tiny wolf relaxed beneath her fingers, though it refused to leave its place. Rowan felt the same strange pull inside his chest again. She had commanded nothing. She had simply spoken with kindness, and every frightened heartbeat around her answered. Garrick noticed it too, but his conclusion was very different. "You see," he shouted to his men. "She's controlling them." Murmurs spread through the warriors. "Forbidden magic," one whispered. "She bewitched the children," another muttered. Emily's face paled. "No," she pleaded. "Please, that's not true. Bind her." Four warriors advanced together. Before they could reach her, Rowan finally stepped out from the shadows. "That's enough." His voice was calm, yet every word carried the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. The entire clearing froze. Garrick slowly turned toward the cloaked stranger. "Who are you to interfere in council business?" Rowan lowered the hood from his head. Moonlight caught the silver mark of the royal bloodline glowing faintly along his temple. Captain Elias and the royal guards immediately stepped into the clearing behind him and knelt without hesitation. "Your Majesty," they said together. Color drained from Garrick's face. Every warrior dropped to one knee in stunned silence. Emily stared at the stranger who had spoken so gently only moments before. Her breath caught as she realized the truth. The man she believed to be an ordinary traveler was none other than Rowan Blackwood, the Alpha King himself. Yet while every warrior bowed before the king, something even more astonishing happened. The wolf pups never moved toward Rowan. They remained exactly where they were, gathered around the rejected Omega, as though their hearts had already chosen the only place they truly felt safe. For the first time since Emily Carter had been banished from Ashridge, every powerful wolf in the clearing was kneeling, yet not one of them was kneeling for her. They knelt for the crown, for the bloodline, for the man whose name could silence entire territories. Emily lowered her gaze, suddenly aware of her torn sleeves, her bare feet, the dirt on her hem, and the trembling pups pressed against her legs. Rowan Blackwood stood between her and the council warriors like a wall of shadow carved into human form. "No one touches her," he said. Elder Garrick swallowed hard, but fear quickly sharpened into desperation. "Your Majesty, with respect, you have not seen what we have seen. This Omega draws children from their homes. They abandon their mothers, ignore their fathers, cross dangerous borders just to reach her. That is not natural." Rowan's silver eyes narrowed. "And yet every child you claim she stole is alive, unharmed, and standing willingly beside her. Because she has enchanted them. Then prove it." The words cut cleanly through the clearing. Garrick had no answer. Only anger. Only humiliation. Only the stubborn pride of a man who had already condemned someone too weak to fight back. Before the silence could settle, a frail voice rose from the darkness beyond the trees. "He cannot prove what was never done." Everyone turned. An old woman stepped slowly into the moonlight, leaning on a twisted cedar staff. Her white hair fell in a long braid over one shoulder, and though her body looked fragile, the wolf within her scent felt ancient, older than Ashridge, older than the council, older perhaps than the laws they all pretended had always existed. Captain Elias stiffened. "Keeper Marin." Even Rowan's expression changed at the name. Emily had heard stories of the keepers, wolves who guarded bloodline histories and moonborn prophecies no pack was allowed to destroy. But she had never seen one in person. The old woman walked past the kneeling warriors without glancing at them and stopped before Emily. For a long moment, her pale eyes studied the pups gathered around the young Omega. Then she smiled, not with surprise, but with recognition. So the line survived after all. Emily's throat tightened. What line? Keeper Marin reached out, not touching her, only hovering weathered fingers near Emily's heart. The smallest pup whimpered softly and nuzzled Emily's ankle. "The Moon Mother's bloodline," Marin said. A ripple of shock passed through the clearing. Even Garrick stepped back as if the words themselves had struck him. Rowan's voice dropped. "That bloodline vanished 200 years ago." "No," Marin replied. "It was hidden, because alphas feared what they could not command." Emily shook her head faintly. "I don't have a bloodline. I don't even have a wolf." Marin's gaze softened. "Child, you were never empty. You were listening to a part of the world most wolves forgot how to hear." The old keeper turned to the gathered warriors. "Once, before territories were divided by pride, the Moon Mother blessed certain Omega women with an instinct stronger than dominance. They could calm orphaned pups, guide lost children through storms, and soothe wounded wolves without force. Not magic, not witchcraft. Maternal moon bond." Emily's breath trembled. The memories came all at once. Children calming when she walked by, injured animals crawling toward her hands, mothers staring with unease whenever their pups smiled at her without knowing why. All her life, she had believed those moments were accidents. "But why do they come to me?" she whispered. Marin looked toward the wolf pups. "Because every child knows the difference between power and safety." The clearing fell silent beneath that truth. Rowan looked at Emily then, really looked at her. Not as a suspect, not as an Omega, not as a mystery, but as a woman who had spent years being punished for the gentlest gift in the kingdom. Something in his face shifted, quiet and irreversible. Garrick sensed the danger of that moment. "Your Majesty," he said quickly, "even if this legend is true, it makes her more dangerous, not less. Every pack will fight to possess her. Every alpha will want control over the children who trust her. If you protect her, you risk rebellion." Emily's hands curled against her dress. She had not asked to be rare. She had not asked to be feared. She had only opened her door to frighten children. Rowan slowly turned toward Garrick. "Then the rebellion will begin with me standing in front of her." A breathless gasp passed through the council warriors. Emily stared at him, stunned. But before anyone could respond, a horn sounded from the distant ridge, long, cold, and royal. Captain Elias went rigid. "Your Majesty, the full council has arrived." Through the trees, hundreds of torchlights began to bloom across the hills, surrounding the cabin from every side. Hundreds of flames flickered across the surrounding hills until the quiet forest resembled a sea of fire. Council banners bearing the crests of every major pack swayed beneath the moonlight, while armored wolves descended through the trees in disciplined ranks. Emily had never seen so many alphas gathered in one place. Fear settled heavily inside her chest, but the wolf pups surrounding her refused to move. Some hid behind her legs. Others curled against her feet. The smallest silver pup remained asleep in her arms, completely unaware that an entire kingdom had come to judge the woman holding him. Rowan Blackwood stepped forward before anyone else could speak. His broad shoulders formed a silent barrier between Emily and the advancing council. Every instinct within him urged caution. As king, his duty was to preserve peace among the territories. One reckless decision could ignite civil war. Yet every time he glanced back at the frightened Omega behind him, he remembered the impossible trust in the children's eyes. That trust could not be forged through fear. High Elder Cedric, leader of the Royal Council, finally emerged from the crowd. His silver ceremonial cloak swept across the forest floor as he approached with measured steps. Unlike Garrick, his expression revealed neither anger nor hatred, only cold calculation. "Your Majesty," Cedric said with a respectful bow, "we ask only that the woman be placed in council custody until the truth is established." Rowan's voice remained calm. "The truth has already begun revealing itself." Cedric folded his hands behind his back. "A forgotten bloodline changes nothing. If Keeper Marin speaks correctly, then this Omega possesses an ability capable of influencing every future generation of wolves. That power cannot remain uncontrolled." Emily lowered her eyes. She hated the way they spoke about her, not as a person, but as something to be possessed. Something dangerous. Something valuable. "I don't want power," she whispered almost to herself. Few heard her words. Rowan did. Cedric continued. "Every alpha present has already received reports. Wolf pups are abandoning territories. They ignore borders. They cross mountains alone. Soon panic will spread through every pack. Parents will believe they are losing their children. They're finding safety," Rowan answered quietly. "Not abandoning family." Cedric's gaze sharpened. "Perhaps, but kingdoms are not governed by feelings. They are governed by order." Silence settled between them. Rowan knew exactly what Cedric was asking without saying the words aloud. Surrender the Omega. Allow the council to imprison her. Preserve political stability. It was the decision many kings before him would have made without hesitation. Captain Elias watched his king closely. He had fought beside Rowan for more than a decade. He recognized the expression crossing the Alpha King's face. Rowan was choosing between his crown and his conscience. Emily slowly stepped forward until she stood beside him instead of behind him. "Your Majesty," she said softly, refusing to meet his eyes, "if taking me prevents bloodshed, then let them." Rowan turned toward her in disbelief. "You would surrender?" A sad smile touched her lips. "I've spent my whole life losing things." Her fingers gently stroked the sleeping silver pup. "If this keeps the children safe, then perhaps it's enough." Those simple words struck Rowan harder than any battlefield wound he had ever received. She still thought first of others. Even now, even after exile, even after betrayal, she expected nothing for herself. Something inside him settled with absolute certainty. He stepped forward until he stood directly before the council. Moonlight reflected from the royal crest upon his chest. His voice carried across the clearing with quiet authority. "Hear my judgment." Every conversation stopped. Every warrior stood motionless. "Emily Carter will not be imprisoned." Murmurs erupted instantly. Cedric's expression darkened. Rowan continued before anyone could interrupt. "She has committed no crime. She has harmed no child. She has healed every frightened soul that found her door. If any wolf wishes to accuse her, bring evidence instead of fear." Garrick stepped forward furiously. "Your Majesty, this decision may divide every pack in the north." Rowan met his eyes without flinching. "Then let history remember who chose division." His next words echoed through the forest with unmistakable finality. Anyone wishing to lay a hand on Emily Carter must first come through their king. The declaration fell over the gathering like thunder. Even seasoned alpha warriors stared at Rowan in stunned disbelief. Never before had a king publicly placed one rejected Omega above the demands of the council. Emily's breath caught. She had spent years believing no one would ever stand beside her. Now the most powerful alpha alive had chosen exactly that. But far beyond the ring of torchlight, hidden deep among the shadows where no council scout was watching, dozens, then hundreds, of tiny glowing eyes quietly opened between the trees. More wolf pups were coming. No one spoke. Even the crackling torches seemed to fade beneath the weight of Rowan Blackwood's declaration. The Alpha King stood unwavering before the council, while Emily remained frozen behind him, unable to understand why the most powerful wolf in the kingdom had chosen to risk everything for someone the world had discarded. Then the silence broke, not with words, but with tiny paws racing across fallen leaves. Every head turned toward the forest. One wolf pup burst from the darkness. Then another. Then 5. Then 20. Within seconds the hillside came alive with movement as countless tiny wolves emerged between the ancient pines, slipping beneath bushes, climbing over moss-covered stones, weaving fearlessly through the ranks of stunned warriors. They ignored the armed alphas. They ignored their own parents calling desperately from the torchlit crowd. They ran toward only one person. Emily gasped as the first little pup reached her, throwing itself happily against her legs. Another climbed into her arms beside the sleeping silver pup. Others crowded around her feet until there was barely enough ground left to stand upon. Tiny tails wagged wildly. Small cries of excitement echoed through the clearing. Some of the youngest wolves could hardly walk straight, yet they stumbled determinately toward the rejected Omega, as though every instinct within them had been pulling them to this exact place. "No," Elder Garrick whispered, his face draining of color. "This cannot be happening." Across the clearing, frightened parents called out to their children. "Luna!" one mother cried, kneeling with open arms. A tiny gray pup looked toward her voice for only a heartbeat before gently rubbing its face against Emily's hand instead. Another father stepped forward, tears filling his eyes. "Finn, come here, son." The little black pup glanced at him lovingly, then calmly walked back to Emily and curled beside her boots. There was no fear in their actions, no enchantment clouding their eyes, only absolute trust. Emily knelt slowly, overwhelmed as dozens of tiny bodies surrounded her. "It's all right," she whispered through trembling breaths. "Your families are here." She expected them to run home. None of them did. Instead, one by one, they leaned gently against her as if assuring her that she was not alone. Rowan watched the impossible scene unfold with quiet wonder. Keeper Marin's words echoed inside his mind. Every child knows the difference between power and safety. He finally understood. These pups had never chosen Emily over their parents. They had chosen the place where fear disappeared. Around them, even hardened alpha warriors lowered their weapons. No battlefield strategy could explain what they were witnessing. No ancient law accounted for hundreds of wolf pups from rival territories peacefully gathering around one woman who had never demanded a single thing from them. High Elder Cedric slowly stepped closer, his stern face softening for the first time. He studied the children carefully, searching for any sign of coercion, any trace of dark magic. He found none. One tiny white pup wandered over to him, sniffed his ceremonial robes, then cheerfully trotted back to Emily without hesitation. Cedric released a slow breath. "No spell," he murmured. "No fear." Garrick refused to surrender his anger. "They're confused," he insisted. "They're only children." Before anyone could answer, the smallest silver pup awoke in Emily's arms. It blinked sleepily, looked around at the enormous crowd of wolves, then quietly climbed onto her shoulder. A moment later it lifted its tiny head toward the moon and let out a soft howl. The sound barely carried across the clearing. Yet instantly, every wolf pup surrounding Emily answered together. Hundreds of young voices rose beneath the silver moon in one gentle chorus. Not a battle cry, not a warning, but a song so pure that tears appeared in the eyes of mothers and fathers throughout the gathering. The forest itself seemed to exhale. Birds settled peacefully into the branches overhead. Even the restless wind became still. Emily closed her eyes as the tiny chorus surrounded her. She had spent years believing she was unwanted, broken, forgotten by the moon goddess herself. Yet in this single impossible moment, every lost child in the Northern Territories had unknowingly answered the question she had carried since childhood. She had never been rejected by destiny. She had only been waiting for the ones who could recognize her heart before anyone else did. Rowan slowly stepped beside her, no longer shielding her from danger because there was no danger left to shield her from. The truth had revealed itself more powerfully than any speech ever could. And as hundreds of stunned wolves watched the children choose Emily again and again without a single command, the kingdom they thought they understood began to change forever. The last echoes of the Pups' gentle chorus drifted into the night until silence embraced the forest once more. No command had summoned them. No alpha had ordered them to stay. Yet hundreds of young wolves remained gathered around Emily Carter, as if the moon herself had woven invisible threads between every frightened heart and the woman who had never turned a single child away. High Elder Cedric slowly removed the silver medallion hanging from his neck, the ancient symbol of the Royal Council's authority. He looked at Emily for a long moment before lowering his head. "We judged you without truth," he said quietly. "For that, the council bears the shame, not you." One by one, the remaining elders followed his example. Even Garrick stood frozen, his pride battling the undeniable reality before him. At last, with visible reluctance, he lowered his head as well. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice barely louder than a whisper. Emily blinked in disbelief. She had imagined this moment countless times during lonely nights in her small cabin, yet now that it had finally arrived, she felt no triumph. Only relief. "You don't owe me anything," she answered softly. "Just don't make another child feel unwanted because they're different." Her words settled over the gathering more heavily than any accusation could have. Several parents quietly knelt beside their own pups, tears slipping down weathered faces as they remembered moments they had mistaken fear for weakness or gentleness for failure. Rowan Blackwood watched Emily with growing admiration. She had every reason to demand justice, revenge, or recognition. Instead, she asked only for kindness. That, more than any prophecy, convinced him the Moon Mother had chosen well. Slowly, he stepped toward her until only a single pace separated them. Every eye in the clearing followed the Alpha King. Emily instinctively lowered her gaze again, but Rowan gently shook his head. "Please," he said, "look at me." She did. Beneath the silver moon, with hundreds of witnesses surrounding them, Rowan placed one knee upon the forest floor. A collective gasp swept through every pack. No king in living memory had ever knelt before an Omega. Rowan rested one hand over his heart, not in surrender, but in respect. "Emily Carter," he said, his steady voice carrying across the silent valley. "I came here believing someone had stolen our children." He glanced toward the countless wolf pups happily gathered around her. "Instead, I discovered the one person they had already chosen to trust." Emily felt tears blur her vision. Rowan continued, "A kingdom can survive without the strongest warrior. It can survive without the richest territory, but it cannot survive without compassion." He smiled gently, the stern mask of a king giving way to the warmth of an ordinary man. "The greatest secret I learned was never hidden inside ancient bloodlines." His eyes met hers with complete certainty. "The secret was you." The smallest silver pup suddenly climbed onto Emily's shoulder again before carefully reaching one tiny paw toward Rowan. The Alpha King chuckled softly and offered his hand. Instead of retreating, the little wolf placed its paw against his palm. Almost instantly, dozens of other pups happily crowded around them, tails wagging so fiercely that laughter spread through the gathering for the first time that night. Even Garrick could not suppress a faint smile. Keeper Marin quietly looked toward the moon above the trees. "Balance has returned," she whispered. Weeks later, the lonely cabin deep within the forest remained exactly where it had always stood. Emily refused every offer to move into a palace. Instead, Rowan ordered a peaceful sanctuary to be built around her home where every pack could safely bring orphaned, injured, or frightened pups without fear of judgment. No borders existed there. No rivalries. Only healing. Parents soon discovered something remarkable. The children who spent time with Emily always returned home more confident, more peaceful, and more deeply connected to their own families than before. They had never been taken away. They had simply been reminded what unconditional love felt like. Whenever Rowan visited, he never arrived with soldiers unless duty demanded it. Most days he came carrying fresh bread or firewood, quietly helping repair fences or feeding playful pups that climbed all over the Alpha King without the slightest fear. People whispered that the king had found his heart in a forgotten cabin deep within the woods. Perhaps they were right. As the first light of dawn spilled across the forest, one peaceful morning, Emily stepped outside while dozens of wolf pups raced happily through wildflowers surrounding the little home that had once been a place of exile. Rowan joined her silently, standing beside her without speaking. Together they watched laughter replace loneliness, trust replace fear, and hope replace every cruel judgment the world had once placed upon her. Above them, the moon slowly faded as the rising sun painted the sky with gold, reminding every wolf who witnessed their story that true strength was never measured by the power to command others, but by the quiet courage to become the place where every lost heart could finally find its way home.